Welcome to Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson. Thanks for tuning in today. Our topic is the mental health crisis facing the United States. And my guest is Dr. Lauren Martin, who is a mental health researcher and the chief scientific officer for Alter Health Group, which treats mental health disorders like depression, anxiety, addiction, and more. Dr. Martin, thank you so much for being here today. It's great to see you.
Thanks, Lori. It's great to see you.
So, we talk about the mental health situation in the United States, and we've seen it really plummet because of the pandemic, the isolation, the shutdowns. But the mental health picture of the United States was actually pretty bad even before the pandemic. Can you kind of give us kind of an overview from 30,000 feet where things stand at this point?
Sure, absolutely. I'd love to. I'm glad actually that we're getting more media attention on this. The American Psychological Association, really early on after the first year of the pandemic, published a report on stress in America. And in that report, they really highlighted the impact of the pandemic on Americans. Looking at the statistics, you're looking at an 80% number of people who were reporting stress associated with the COVID-19 pandemic, which I think many of us can relate to as we were, juggling this sudden change in lifestyle associated with the pandemic. And of course, those who, lost loved ones or who may have been experiencing illness themselves, civil unrest, that also came with certainly the murder of George Floyd and protests centered around that. There were just a number of factors that led into this rise in mental health, and several reports that are showing the behavioral consequences associated with that rise that I'd love to talk to you about.
Well, what are some of those behavioral consequences? I'm guessing, obviously, anxiety and depression, but we see that the suicide rate has also gone up. Can you talk about some of the consequences of this stress that we've been going through, especially the last 2 years during the pandemic?
Yes, absolutely. You mentioned anxiety and depression, and actually The Lancet, one of the world's top medical journals, they published an article last fall that looked at the rise worldwide in cases of major depressive disorder and anxiety disorders. And for major depressive disorders, that rise was actually around 28%, 27.6% to be exact, and the rise in anxiety disorders was 25.6%. So this is a global crisis. It's not just isolated to the United States. And certainly, we're seeing the impact of that on behavioral health. The CDC just published a report on suspected suicide attempts, hospitalizations for suspected suicide attempts. And unfortunately, what we see in that report is that it's the youngest generation that is really bearing the brunt of this. 12 to 17-year-old girls saw a 50% rise in these hospitalizations for suspected suicide attempts year over year. And, for the 12 to 17-year-old boys, there was an increase as well, although that was a much smaller increase at around 4%. So we're seeing the behavioral outcomes. We saw it with the rise in overdose deaths as well, where in the first year of the pandemic, we saw a 30% increase in overdose deaths. That has continued to rise. Unfortunately, it didn't settle. It rose another 15% last year. We had a record number of overdose deaths at 107,000. We see, a 30% rise in homicides. We see rises in certainly the sales of alcohol. Sales of cigarettes rose like for the first time in many years. And even things like weight change. That APA report that I mentioned earlier, they found that there was over 60% of the population reporting undesired weight change since the pandemic began, which again is one of these behavioral health outcomes that we see associated with changes in mental health.
Right. Well, that last one I can speak to on a personal level. I mean, you talk about everyone I know seems to have gained weight during the pandemic. And, you talk about the increase in alcohol sales and drug use when people feel bad emotionally, they reach for something that helps them feel better. A lot of us, that's, chocolate chip cookies, other people that could be alcohol, and other people that could be drugs. And but so while that does make us feel better in the immediate, in the long term, even eating the wrong type of diet can have long-term consequences, negative consequences on our mental health. So when you talk about the depression, the anxiety, what is at the root? Is it isolation from the shutdowns? Because those are largely over.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because what I'm seeing in the statistics, it's really the younger generations that are bearing the brunt of this, and they're the ones that are experiencing probably the greatest disruption to their lives. Certainly, when you speak of isolation, you probably would think of like an older generations, especially those who may have pre-existing health conditions, and just age is a factor, and knowing its vulnerability to COVID and the need to self-isolate, and yet. The statistics show that that the older generations actually have fared the best from a mental health perspective through the pandemic. It's really the millennials, the Generation Z, and certainly the youngest populations that are the adolescent populations that are really experiencing this the most. There's been some reports that have shown the impact on parents, and that's where you see the millennials who are probably struggling as they had to parent through the pandemic, and also balance jobs with really kind of having their children at home with school closures. But I think really when you look at the young adult population and the teenage population, when their like hopes and dreams are really kind of put on hold and really altered as a result of the pandemic, that's where you start to see the greatest impact as they are trying to look for that hope for the future.
I cannot even imagine what it would be like to be a teenager, especially during the pandemic, because that is, as you say, when you start to sort of map out and dream about what type of a future you want. And it's just everything has been literally shut down the last couple of years, and they haven't been able to socialize and go to the sports and drama. And I think back to all the things that, I and so many of my friends did in high school. And these poor kids have just been without that. It's no wonder they're suffering from a mental health perspective. We're going to take a quick break and be right back with Dr. Lauren Martin. We're talking about the mental health crisis facing the United States right now and what we can do about it. So stay tuned. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We're talking about the mental health crisis facing the United States. My guest is Dr. Lauren Martin. And Dr. Martin, before the break, we were talking about the kids, especially the teenagers, and how the pandemic shutdowns have just so negatively affected their mental health. Wanted to talk about some of these, the way that kids have been trying to deal with the shutdowns, which is going to social media. And so much of the research these days points to the negative impact of social media on especially teenagers, especially teenage girls. Can you talk about why that is?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially being a father of two teenage daughters myself, it's something that I'm keenly aware of. I think one of the biggest issues with social media is that it tends to project a false image of reality, and by doing that, we've got, as consumers of information, this appearance of a life that's really not true to reality. And so as teenagers observe social media, and certainly it's teenage girls who tend to consume the most social media, they tend to start to compare their own life to this false image of lives that they're engaged with online. And again, we know that true life has many ups and downs, but with social media, it's this projection of, perhaps only good things that someone's experiencing, and so someone else who's observing that consistently is thinking, how come their life is so great and mine's so difficult? And it's really a false sense of reality that I think is difficult for teenage brains to digest.
And really not just teenage brains, but even adults can struggle with mental health issues that are directly related to social media. And not just the comparing of yourself to other people's lives that look so great, but also the negativity. And I'm talking especially about Facebook and the fomenting of hate and these negative emotions. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really interesting how, as a society, we've certainly lost a lot of decorum as it comes to conversation, right? And we see that for whatever reason, it's like behind this veil of secrecy, which isn't necessarily so secret online anymore, but yet people feel like they can just freely attack one another and say just terrible things, which certainly has a compounding effect on people, especially the most vulnerable, when they come under this attack and don't feel like they have the support that they need. It can really be weighing them down mentally and emotionally, and spiral into states of depression.
I interviewed a mental health expert not too long ago, and he said people should take their mental health check before they get on social media and then afterward, and see if you feel worse afterward. And for me, it was always yes. So I stopped using social media, and I feel great, not especially Facebook, because it was just hate-filled. I hate to say that, but it's true. Do you have recommendations like that for treatment for people who are suffering from depression and anxiety? Do you recommend they cut back or at least stop, or in some cases stop social media use?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think that identifying the triggers, right, is very important. And if one knows that they're engaged in a lot of social media, then that very well could be a trigger for you. And so being able to cut that out or cut back, or even adjust the way that you consume social media. Maybe it's like, I just got to stay away from the comments, right? Certainly that's where a lot of the vitriol is found, within the comment section of social media. And so, there are different approaches that one can take to try to adjust their behavior as it relates to consumption of social media.
So at Alter Health Group, you actually treat patients, inpatient and outpatient, for depression, anxiety. What are some of the things that you can tell people who are experiencing that right now that might help them?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I wanted to mention also, as a result of the pandemic, we received funding from FEMA and the California Department of Healthcare Services to provide this virtual counseling support in the form of the Be Well line. And over the past year, we've had over 30,000 of these counseling encounters, which has really been eye-opening for us, because we're able to see from like a broad perspective what it is that people are really struggling with. And so they can text in, they can call in. We're just added the virtual meeting capabilities. And by doing that, we're able to try to extend our ability to help others. Certainly the vast majority of people, help seekers as we call them, are struggling with anxiety and depression. And sometimes they just need a helping conversation to help them through. We're have the ability to escalate them to a licensed level of care as needed. But these are trained crisis counselors who are like responding to these calls, and we're from that building out on our ability to help others. We really feel like technology has the potential to help solve these issues, but not by replacing the human connection that's so critical. We're big believers in and establishing a strong therapeutic alliance or working alliance between the help seeker and the help giver, or clients and therapists.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that that is a strong predictor of treatment outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the strongest predictor of treatment outcomes outside of the person's own willingness to change, which is certainly one of those first steps, right? Is to get someone to the point where they're like, yes, I need this. I need to change.
Great. It's great when people ask for help. We're going to take another quick break and be right back with Dr. Lauren Martin. Our topic today is mental health. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and we're continuing our discussion with Dr. Lauren Martin about the mental health crisis in the United States right now. And Dr. Martin, one of the problems is the shortage of mental health professionals.
Yes, Lori. In fact, this shortage was, well documented even before the COVID-19 pandemic, and certainly with this rise in mental health disorders, the gap in licensed professionals and those who are in need of help continues to rise. We're looking at right now a shortage of mental health professionals nationwide is estimated to be around 40%, but that doesn't even take into account the increases in cases. We're seeing the average time nationwide for someone in need of mental health help. It's taking them on average 48 days to actually see a therapist. And so now this is something that needs to be addressed, something that we need to think differently about mental health and mental health treatment. And in particular, knowing that, we can't fill that gap just overnight. I've been a professor in a doctoral program in clinical psychology for over a decade. And I mean, this is many years in the making, right, to train mental health professionals. And so I think changing the structure and the way that we go about with treatment is critical. We're seeing things like different models that are emerging, having coaches or paraprofessionals that play a role in mental health treatment alongside licensed care. I think moving towards those kind of models, but also, we have to have a loosening of state regulations, because licenses do not transfer readily across states, and we're starting to see that a little bit. Certainly with doctoral level clinical psychologists, with PsyPact, in which there are several states that have signed on to this agreement that allows a licensed clinical professional in one state to be able to practice across state borders. And I think we're going to need more of that, right? We need that to extend to the master's levels. We need that to extend to counselor levels, so that we can really start to address the needs that are out there, needs that are greatest really in underserved communities. We see that especially actually in rural populations, and a drive right now, a push to try to address that. That's one of the positives that we can look at with the pandemic, is actually the emergence of virtual therapy.
Absolutely. Telemedicine, as they call it.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to take one final break and be right back. We're talking about the mental health crisis in the United States. Stay with us. Welcome back to Healthy Living. We're talking about the mental health crisis facing the United States right now. People suffering from addiction, anxiety, depression. Where can people get help, Dr. Martin?
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned that. As we left off, we were talking about, some of these emerging, virtual therapy ways of addressing the mental health crisis. At Alter Health Group, I've helped co-found a company called Mindfully, based upon what we've learned from our Be Well line and the crisis response to the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as our success in treating anxiety and depression and addiction and other disorders. We realized that we can try to address this emerging need by using virtual therapy, and really by using this model that uses technology to enhance human connectedness. And so through Mindfully, we're able to take a help seeker and pair them with the care team that is the right fit for who they are, using some machine learning prediction models. And by doing that, we're able to, establish that critical, working alliance or therapeutic alliance that's necessary in order to bring them to successful treatment outcomes. And we also recognize the need for a team approach, and so that we can surround a help seeker with a care team that would include paraprofessionals as well as licensed professionals who together can assist them through their mental health journey. It really is a journey. It's not something that is easily navigated alone. We really believe that it takes this type of team approach that can provide social, emotional, and also the licensed mental health care support necessary to bring evidence-based interventions to meet the needs of so many.
Well, is there a website associated with that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's www.mindfully.com.
And how do you spell mindfully?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up. So it's a play on the word mindfully. It's MINDFULI. And we are just launching actually right now. But as I mentioned, we've been in this space since the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, and have just built upon what we've learned to bring about this new solution.
All right. Well, Dr. Lauren Martin, thank you so much for being here. It was great to be with you, and we appreciate all you're doing to help ease the mental health crisis.
Thank you, Lori.
And thanks to you for tuning into this edition of Healthy Living. I'm Lori Johnson, and we'll see you again next week. Bye now.